When wild instincts surge without warning, even seasoned hunters can be caught in terrifying moments. From a grizzly ripping through a luxury camp to a bull moose charging across cracking ice, these encounters show how fast calm trips turn into desperate fights for survival. Mountain lions explode from cliffs, rifles jam, and frozen valleys echo with warning shots. In this video, we'll break down 6 real hunting close calls where peaceful wilderness moments instantly turned deadly. Watch till the end. On October 12, 2025, a group of 12 hunters reached a quiet stretch of the Amur wilderness in eastern Russia. Mist drifted through the tall spruce trees and a narrow creek ran along the edge of the clearing. This trip had been planned for months, and the men arrived with high spirits, believing the remote location would offer long days of tracking large game. Among the group was Viktor Lebedev, who had organized the entire expedition. He had grown up in a small village near the Amur River and spent many years guiding friends through deep forest valleys. His careful planning, steady leadership, and strong understanding of wildlife made others trust his decisions. Alongside him was Pavel Orlov, a skilled marksman who enjoyed exploring difficult terrain. Pavel had hunted across wide mountain slopes and dense riverbanks and carried a .375 H&H Magnum, cleaned and prepared for the steep hills around the camp. Another member was Igor Antonov, who brought his .338 Lapua Magnum, a rifle he had used on long hunts across open plains. The rest of the group carried their own gear, including .30, 06 Springfield rifles set for powerful shots. Each man believed that their equipment and experience would help them handle anything the wilderness could present. The camp itself was large and well arranged. Canvas tents surrounded a fire pit where strips of bacon cooked in a wide pan. Folding tables held maps, lanterns, and spare tools. ATVs rested near the edge of the clearing, ready to be used for moving supplies or exploring deeper parts of the valley. The hunters talked, planned routes, and moved between tents while the sun lowered behind the thick tree line. Laughter filled the area, mixing with the crackling fire and steady sound of the creek. Not far from the edge of the clearing, Victor's 10-year-old son, Mikhail, played near the cool water. He had joined the trip to spend time outdoors and learn more about the land. Although too young to hunt, he enjoyed watching the men prepare, taking in every detail about tracks, wind, and forest paths. His father kept a close eye on him, reminding him to stay near the creek where the ground was soft and open. As the light dimmed, a strong scent spread through the trees. The smell of cooked food, fish oil, and camp scraps carried far beyond the tents. Deep in the fog-soaked spruce, a massive Russian grizzly caught the scent and began moving toward the clearing. The animal had been searching for food along the valley, and the strong aroma drew it closer with steady determination. Its large paws moved silently over the soft forest floor, mist clinging to its thick coat. Back at the camp, the hunters remained unaware of the danger approaching through the fog. Firelight flickered across the tents, casting long shadows. The men continued checking their gear while soft mist gathered around their feet. Then, without warning, the grizzly burst from the dense trees, its massive frame charging straight through the fog toward the heart of the camp. The gigantic grizzly burst into the clearing with unstoppable force, shaking the ground as it crashed through low branches and fog. In seconds, the peaceful camp changed into a scene of fear and chaos. The animal struck the nearest tent, flattening the canvas and bending the metal frame underneath its massive weight. Hunters scrambled through the drifting smoke of the fire, trying to reach their rifles as the bear tore toward the center of the camp. The shockwave of its impact toppled ATVs, sending bags and tools flying across the grass. As the creature charged again, its powerful body broke through another tent, trapping 2 hunters beneath heavy beams and piles of canvas. The falling structure pinned their chests, crushing them before anyone could reach them. Panicked movement filled the clearing as men tried to escape, mud spraying under their boots. Several hunters managed to fire their rifles, but the thick fog, overturned gear, and confusion made aiming difficult. The grizzly moved with alarming speed through the drifting smoke, forcing the men backward as it swung its enormous paws, tearing through sleeping bags, poles, and packed crates. One man fell under an overturned table as the bear plowed through supplies, leaving deep marks across the wood and sending debris clattering down the slope. Near the creek, young Mikhail heard the violent noise and ducked beneath a fallen log. Cold water soaked his clothes as he pressed into the mud, trembling while splinters and leaves drifted around him. Through the mist, he saw the glow of the fire flickering wildly as the grizzly pushed deeper into the ruined camp. He stayed hidden, knowing any sudden move might draw the animal's attention. Back in the clearing, 3 more hunters became trapped when an ATV tipped over, crushing their legs and forcing them to the ground. The bear rushed past them, but falling debris and collapsing gear weighed heavily on their bodies, leaving them severely wounded. The remaining men attempted to climb the slope behind the tents, but the slick mud and scattered supplies made it difficult to move. The storm clouds above released steady rain, darkening the soil and adding to the danger. With a final burst of movement, the massive predator swung its body toward the fire pit, scattering burning wood and ash. The sudden flare of sparks confused the animal, and after a few tense moments, it turned away from the brightest flames. The grizzly lumbered back through the fog, its heavy shape fading into the dark spruce forest. The clearing grew silent except for the sound of dripping rain and broken branches settling into the ground. When the air finally stilled, Mikhail crawled from under the log. The boy stepped carefully across the wet soil, moving toward the dim shapes of the ruined tents. Smoke rose from the scattered firewood, and the camp lay in near total destruction. 9 men were either crushed or fatally injured, and the remaining survivors struggled to breathe, covered in cuts and bruises from falling equipment and broken structures. As daylight slowly returned, the survivors gathered what little strength they had. They wrapped the injuries as best they could and began moving through the deep mud toward safer ground, leaving the broken camp behind. They walked in silence, shaken by the speed and power of the attack. Mikhail stayed close to the group, cold and frightened but alive. By the time they reached a distant ridge, the full weight of the night settled upon them. The wilderness stretched wide and unforgiving around them, and the memory of the sudden attack would remain with them forever. In that remote valley, the survivors understood that even the most prepared camp could fall in moments when a giant of the forest struck without warning. In late November 2024, the cold season had settled deep into Alberta's northern wilderness. Snow covered the forest in thick layers, and frozen branches cracked under the weight of ice. Hunter Logan Pierce moved through this harsh landscape with a calm, steady pace. He had spent many years hiking long distances, learning how to read tracks, judge wind changes, and stay balanced on uneven ground. Logan respected the land and understood that every step in winter could hold hidden risks. Ice, loose snow, and sharp winds made the forest feel both beautiful and dangerous. By his side walked Cameron Reed, an experienced guide who had spent most of his life exploring the wide stretches of boreal terrain. Cameron knew the valleys, the ridges, the river bends, and the patterns of wildlife that passed through them. He often helped hunters move safely through places where the weather and terrain changed without warning. Together, the 2 men planned a long day of tracking a large bull moose, hoping to find it before fresh snowfall covered the prints again. The morning air felt sharp on their faces as they followed deep marks in the snow. The trail led them toward a valley carved by a twisting river. Winter had started to freeze the water, forming wide plates of ice along its edge. Some spots were solid, while others held hidden cracks under a thin layer of snow. The men stepped carefully, testing each surface as they moved. The forest around them stayed silent except for the soft crunch of their boots. Thin mist drifted above the trees, and the open ground near the river reflected pale sunlight. Logan moved ahead as the tracks grew fresher. He believed they were close to the bull, and the excitement of the moment quickened his steps. When he reached a snow-covered ledge of frozen river, he paused and looked around. He did not realize the moose was only a short distance away, feeding quietly near the bank. The wind shifted, carrying his scent across the open space. The massive animal lifted its head, ears forward, muscles tense. The still moment ended in an instant. The moose charged with sudden force, hooves scraping across the icy river surface. Logan stepped back, but his boot slipped on the hidden slick layer. He reached out, grabbing a branch just as the heavy bull thundered past him. The ice cracked under the weight, sending sharp pieces flying across the riverbank. Cameron braced himself against a fallen tree, watching the huge animal circle. The moose stopped, snorting clouds of warm air into the cold wind. Snow scattered as it pawed the ground, its large frame blocking part of the trail. Logan steadied himself, lifting his rifle and firing a warning shot into a tree trunk close by. The echo rolled across the frozen valley, and the bull turned and moved back into the forest, its heavy form fading behind the trees. The forest grew quiet again as the bull disappeared behind the thick line of spruce. Logan stood still for several moments, letting his breathing slow and his balance return. The cold air stung his face, and thin flakes of snow drifted down from the branches above. Cameron moved toward him, stepping around jagged cracks in the river ice. Both men felt the weight of what had just happened. The chase for the moose had turned into a sudden scramble for safety, and now the valley felt different, as if it carried a warning inside the wind. Logan stepped back from the damaged ice shelf, noticing deep marks where the moose had pushed off during its charge. Chunks of frozen water lay scattered across the surface, showing just how fragile the river edge had become. He felt the sting of bruises forming under his heavy clothes, and a dull ache in his legs from where he had slipped. Cameron checked the nearby ground, seeing broken branches and torn snow where the bull had circled. Every sign around them showed how powerful and unpredictable the animal had been. They moved toward higher ground, placing each boot carefully on stable patches of earth. The wind pushed through the valley again, colder than before, carrying sharp grains of snow that brushed across their jackets. Logan tried to shake off the tension in his muscles, but the memory of the huge animal racing across the ice stayed clear in his mind. He understood how close the moment had been. A single misstep could have sent him into freezing water or under the weight of the massive bull. Cameron pointed toward a narrow ridge where the trail looked firm. They climbed slowly, avoiding steep slopes and loose patches. The climb gave them time to gather their thoughts. The danger had passed, but the feeling of uncertainty remained. They reached a dry cluster of rocks and paused, letting the warmth of movement help ease the cold. From the ridge, they looked down at the valley. The frozen river twisted through the trees, its surface broken where the moose had crossed. The forest stood still again, hiding whatever path the animal had taken after the warning shot. Logan knew that the hunt was finished for the day. He had no desire to follow the trail again, and Cameron agreed silently through his steady, cautious steps. They turned back toward camp, walking slowly through the deep snow. Each crunch of the ground reminded them of the fragile conditions they had faced. The sky darkened as late afternoon shadows spread across the terrain. The cold grew stronger, pushing them to keep a steady pace. Logan shifted his rifle across his back, feeling the heaviness of the long day settle into his shoulders. When they reached camp, the small shelter and fire pit brought a sense of safety. Logan set his gear down and examined the scraped skin on his arm, grateful that the injuries were light. Cameron prepared a small fire, letting the warmth rise through the chilly air. As they rested, the aftermath settled clearly in their thoughts. The moose had not harmed them, but the close call revealed something deeper about the frozen wilderness. Logan understood that even skilled hunters could face sudden danger when large animals and unstable terrain combined. The icy river, the shifting ground, and the powerful bull had all played a part in the frightening moment. By nightfall, the valley felt calm again, but the memory of the charge stayed with them. Logan knew he would return to the forest, yet he also carried a new respect for the unpredictable nature of winter hunts. The cold land had shown its strength, and he had learned to move through it with greater care. Late October 2023 settled over northern Maine with short days, cold mornings, and forests thick with spruce and fir. Hunter Ethan Wallace had spent most of his adult life exploring these rugged woods, learning every trail, clearing, and ridge the land had to offer. He grew up in a small town near the state border, raised by a family that valued careful hunting, steady patience, and respect for the wild. Over the years, he became known for his calm nature and skill with tracking signs across damp ground and fallen leaves. His work as a seasonal guide kept him in remote areas for long hours, moving quietly through deep forest as he watched animal habits change with the shifting seasons. Ethan carried a .30.06 Springfield on these late autumn trips, a rifle he knew well and maintained with care. He packed light but kept essential gear in his small backpack. The northern woods at this time of year were quiet, filled with thick mist drifting low between trees, often hiding distant movement. The air held the smell of wet branches and old needles, and the ground felt soft under each step. Even experienced hunters needed to move slowly, since the forest's silence could change without warning. That morning, Ethan followed signs of a mature black bear that had been feeding near the edges of berry patches and fallen logs. Its tracks were fresh, pressed into soft mud, leading deeper into a wooded pocket where shrubs were heavy with late fruit. The mist hung so low that shapes shifted and blended, making it difficult to see far ahead. Ethan moved carefully, keeping his weight centered so the damp needles would not betray his steps. He paused near a cluster of old spruce, scanning the open patch where berries still clung to sagging branches. The area seemed calm, with no sound except faint drips falling from overhead branches. Ethan shifted his footing and studied broken twigs along the forest floor, signs that the bear had moved through recently. The soft fog drifted between trees, touching everything with a pale, cold haze. Then, without any warning, the undergrowth in front of him burst apart. A huge black bear, close to 600 pounds, stepped out of the dense shrubs with heavy force. Logs rolled aside under its weight and a wave of broken debris scattered across the ground. Ethan felt his chest tighten as the animal lowered its head and charged forward with sudden speed. He lifted his rifle instinctively, but the first pull jammed the action. The sound of the click cut through the mist like a warning. Ethan's heart pounded as he dropped low behind a large boulder, landing hard on damp leaves. The bear moved quickly, circling the rock with loud breaths and scraping paws. It pawed at the earth, sending clumps of soil and needles into the air. Its eyes stayed locked in his direction, watching each small movement. Ethan pressed himself tighter against the cold stone as the bear continued to circle. The forest felt close and heavy, the mist wrapping around the scene like a curtain. The bear was prepared to rush again. The bear's heavy steps pressed deeper into the soft earth as it circled the large stone, each move slow but powerful, giving Ethan little time to steady his breath. The mist drifted around them, swirling in uneven shapes as the animal's weight shifted across fallen needles and scattered branches. Ethan felt the rough surface of the stone against his back while he tried to slide his hand toward the rifle without making noise. The damp air wrapped around him, carrying the strong scent of disturbed soil and crushed plants. A sharp scrape against the ground signaled another rush. The bear lunged forward, pushing aside loose logs and broken sticks. Ethan slipped across the wet leaves, his boots skidding as he dodged behind a lower section of the rock. His clothing smeared with mud as he dropped into a crouched position. The world narrowed into only two things, the sound of the animal and the unsteady ground beneath him. He raised the weapon again, cleared the action with shaking fingers, and aimed toward a tall spruce beside him. The shot thundered through the quiet woods, striking the trunk and sending a spray of bark into the air. The loud sound startled the bear, halting its charge. It stepped back with a short shuffle, watching the direction of the blast. A long moment passed before it began to move away, its massive form fading into the thick fog. Ethan stayed still, listening to the crack of branches as the animal retreated deeper into the forest. When the forest settled again, the silence felt almost too heavy. Ethan pushed himself upright, his legs unsteady from the rush of fear and effort. The boulder's surface was cold where his hands had gripped it, and the ground was littered with deep paw marks, broken sticks, and churned soil. His jacket and pants were smeared with dirt and crushed needles, and a thin line of blood ran across his sleeve from scraping a sharp branch. He stepped forward slowly, scanning every shadow around the berry patch. The thick mist had not lifted, and the pale light barely reached the ground. The spruce ahead carried a fresh scar where his warning shot had struck, a rough opening in the bark that marked the moment he was finally able to stop the bear's aggressive circle. Ethan moved with caution toward the edge of the clearing, keeping his rifle ready and eyes fixed on the shifting haze. Reaching a small rise near a fallen tree, he paused to collect himself. His pulse remained unsteady, and cold air filled his lungs in harsh breaths. The danger had passed, but the memory of the animal's speed and strength stayed vivid in his mind. He knew he had been close to serious harm, saved only by quick thinking and the loud blast that forced the bear to pull back. As he turned toward the trail leading out of the forest, the soft crunch under his boots reminded him how easily things could have ended differently. The earth held signs of the struggle, from the scattered debris to the deep impressions where the animal had circled with purpose. Ethan continued his careful steps back toward safety, guided by the faint outline of trees that marked familiar ground. By the time he reached the main path, the mist had thickened again, covering the forest floor in a pale blanket. His clothing was soaked and chilled, his muscles tired from the constant tension. Even so, he felt relief settling slowly into his thoughts. He understood clearly that the forest demanded respect at every turn, especially in late autumn when large predators moved with quiet precision. In the days that followed, he shared the account with local hunters, reminding them that even a smaller bear species could turn a calm outing into a dangerous encounter. The deep marks left in the ground remained as a quiet warning to anyone who passed through the berry patch. Ethan carried the memory forward, knowing the experience would shape every future step he took in the dense northern wilderness. Early October 2025 settled across the rugged mountains of western Montana with cold wind, fog, and the sharp smell of pine. In this wild region, two hunters, Ethan Morales and Sophie Lane, prepared for another long day of tracking elk through steep ridges and narrow passes. Ethan had grown up in a family that taught him patience and respect for the outdoors. He carried a .300 Winchester Magnum with steady confidence, knowing how important precision was in remote terrain. Sophie, trained through years of hiking and hunting, relied on a .270 Weatherby Mark V, a rifle she kept clean and ready for sudden use. Both hunters valued safety and clear decision-making, understanding that the Rocky Mountains could shift from calm to dangerous without warning. They had spent the early part of the season studying tracks, watching elk herds move, and learning how the land changed with each passing day. The range they traveled through was filled with sharp rocks, narrow paths, and sudden drops where clouds drifted so low that the sky blended with the ground. The pair moved carefully along the ridge, stepping over wet moss and loose stones while mist curled around their boots. Their plan for the morning was simple: follow a fresh trail that they believed belonged to a strong bull elk. The prints were deep and widely spaced, signs of a large animal moving with purpose. Ethan carried the map while Sophie checked the slope ahead for safe footing. The wind brushed against their jackets and the sound of distant running water echoed from below the cliffs. Even with the silence of the high country, both remained aware that other animals lived here too, some unseen and far more stealthy. The ridge narrowed as they climbed. Moss coated the rocks in a thin, slick layer, and the air grew colder with each step higher. Fog clung to the cliffs, softening edges and hiding openings in the rock walls. Sophie paused near a cluster of boulders to study the trail while Ethan scanned the slope for movement. The forest around them felt strangely quiet, as if the land was waiting. Then the stillness broke. From a hidden alcove above the ridge, a massive mountain lion erupted into view. Its sudden rush sent loose gravel spraying across the ground. The powerful predator charged with incredible force, its claws tearing at the rocks and thin ice covering parts of the slope. Ethan slipped on the wet moss as the animal closed ground, falling hard against the ridge. Sophie lunged toward a boulder for cover, scraping her hands as she pressed herself behind the stone. The mountain lion circled slowly and deliberately. Its low growl vibrated through the narrow canyon, filling the air with tense energy. The ridge felt smaller now, the steep drop on one side offering little escape. The threat had shown itself, and the hunters braced for whatever came next. The narrow ridge felt even more unstable as the mountain lion continued its steady circling. Ethan pushed himself upright, boots slipping on the damp surface while he tried to get a solid footing. The cold air struck his face as he lifted his rifle, his pulse thudding in his ears. Sophie stayed low behind the boulder, watching the predator's movements while she steadied her breathing. The low mist drifted around them, making the animal's shape blur and sharpen with every shift of the wind. The mountain lion crept closer, muscles tight beneath its coat. Its paws moved with practiced silence, leaving shallow marks on the wet ground. Each slow step felt heavy with intent. Ethan held his position but felt the ridge tilt slightly beneath him. Loose stones rolled away into the canyon below, bouncing off rocks before disappearing into the fog. Sophie braced her legs, preparing to move again if the animal lunged. The predator lowered its head and tensed. Ethan reacted, lifting his rifle toward a nearby tree trunk. The warning shot blasted through the cold air, cracking wood and sending shards scattering across the ridge. The sudden sound cut through the mist and echoed across the canyon walls. The mountain lion flinched, pulling back with stiff shoulders, clearly startled by the force of the shot. For several long seconds, the animal stood frozen on the slope. Its ears flicked back, its tail cutting slow arcs through the air. Then it shifted its weight and retreated several paces. Another moment passed before it turned sharply and bounded up the rocky path, disappearing into the fog as quickly as it had appeared. The ridge quieted again, leaving only the distant rush of wind flowing through the canyon. Ethan lowered his rifle, feeling his arms tremble from both strain and adrenaline. Sophie stepped from behind the boulder, her hands scraped and damp from the rough surface. They stood together on the ridge, breathing hard as they took in the now still landscape. The cold mist wrapped around them while they assessed their cuts and bruises. Nothing severe, but enough to remind them how close the encounter had been. They made their way down the ridge with slow, careful steps, choosing a safer route toward lower ground. Each patch of loose moss and wet rock felt more hazardous after the encounter. When they reached a wide clearing, both hunters paused to gather themselves. By the time they returned to camp, the mountain air felt different. The experience stayed with them, a clear reminder that even in well-planned hunts, danger could appear without warning. The jagged Rockies had shown them how quickly calm could break, leaving them with a lasting respect for the silent power of predators hidden in the mist. In October 2020, the wide stretches of the South Dakota Badlands spread out under a dry autumn sky. Sharp ridges, broken cliffs, and winding washes shaped the land into layers of stone and dust. Two hunters, Logan McKenzie and Hannah Price, moved carefully through this rugged place, hoping to spot a large pronghorn before sunset. Logan had grown up exploring open plains, learning how to read tracks and use long-range rifles with steady control. Hannah had spent years studying wildlife behavior, gaining skill in movement, silence, and patient observation. Both enjoyed challenging hunts that tested their focus and planning. Their day began before sunrise, with packs filled with water, light food, and the tools needed for a long outing. Logan carried a .300 Winchester Magnum set for distant targets, while Hannah held a .270 Weatherby Mark V adjusted for clear, steady shots. The two crawled through narrow canyons, staying close to low ridges and shadowed spots where their movement would blend with the rocky ground. They often used binoculars to scan distant hillsides for signs of grazing animals. As the hours passed, the sun rose high and cast long shapes across the uneven land. The slanted light made it difficult to judge depth and distance. Dust rose from small gusts of wind, floating across ridges and drifting through shallow basins. Every sound echoed strangely, bouncing off dry cliffs before fading out. Logan and Hannah moved slowly, speaking only with small hand motions and careful steps, trying not to disturb the area. By late afternoon, they reached an open wash surrounded by steep edges and rough stone. They knelt near scattered shale, studying a fresh set of prints. The marks suggested a large pronghorn had moved through not long before, likely resting somewhere just beyond the next ridge. Logan raised his binoculars again, searching for movement in the distant layers of brown and gray. Then the land shifted in an instant. A herd of pronghorn burst from behind a nearby bluff, kicking up dust and broken stone. Their speed turned the quiet canyon into a storm of flying debris. The animals had been frightened by something far beyond sight, and now they surged through the wash in a frantic wave. The lead buck angled sharply toward Hannah, who had stepped into the open area only seconds earlier. She tried to move back, but her boots slid on loose shale. She fell hard onto one knee, scraping her skin against sharp fragments. Logan saw the herd rushing toward her and instinctively leapt behind a boulder for cover. He raised his rifle and fired a warning shot into a clear space above the animals, hoping the sound would turn them away from her position. Antlers struck against rocks as several pronghorn dodged past each other. Hooves hammered the ground, sending shards of stone in all directions. The herd circled wildly, creating clouds of dust that covered everything around them. The calm afternoon hunt had turned into sudden chaos. Dust filled the wash as the herd continued its frantic movement, turning the narrow space into a blur of tan bodies, sharp hooves, and scattered stone. Logan stayed low behind the boulder while the echo of his shot faded across the canyon walls. The herd shifted direction, some pronghorn climbing the nearby slope while others darted between large rocks. Their speed made every second feel stretched and tense. Hannah pushed herself to her feet, holding her scraped knee and trying to regain balance on the uneven ground. The lead buck rushed past her, its hooves striking loose pieces of shale that slid down the slope. Several smaller animals followed closely, each one adding to the rough noise that shook the narrow wash. Logan watched carefully as the herd continued its unpredictable path. At last, the animals slowed near the far end of the wash before climbing a jagged ridge and disappearing between two cliffs. The dust hung in the air long after the pronghorn vanished. Hannah brushed dirt from her legs while Logan stepped from behind the boulder to check the area. They both felt the weight of what had almost happened. The chase for a trophy animal had shifted into a dangerous moment without warning, caused by a distant threat they never even saw. The Badlands, with all its beauty and open space, had revealed a side that demanded constant caution. Hannah tested her knee, relieved that it still supported her weight. Logan scanned the ridges for any sign of the herd returning, but the area settled back into stillness. The wind blew through the canyon again, carrying light dust across the open wash. The sharp smell of dry stone filled the air. Both hunters stood quietly, taking in the aftermath of the sudden chaos. They continued moving toward a safer part of the canyon, stepping slowly to avoid slipping on the cracked surface. Their gear shifted softly with each movement, creating a steady reminder of the event they had just endured. The sun dipped lower, spreading long shapes across the cliffs as the temperature began to fall. The day no longer felt like a simple hunt. It now carried a sense of respect for the land's unpredictability. When they reached a wider ridge, Logan and Hannah paused to reflect. They understood that even skilled preparation could not prevent sudden danger in difficult terrain. The memory of the rushing herd stayed with them, reminding them to remain alert at all times. As evening settled over the Badlands, the two hunters made their way back toward camp, shaken but wiser, carrying the lessons of a hunt that nearly turned into disaster. Late September 2025 cast a pale glow over the deep Alaskan wilderness where tall spruce trees stretched far beyond the horizon. In this isolated region, two experienced hunters, Jonas Miller and Eli Navarro, settled inside a small wooden cabin after spending long days tracking elk across rough valleys and cold ridges. Jonas had grown up learning to hunt with patience and respect for the land. His .375H and H Magnum rifle was always cleaned carefully and carried with steady confidence. Eli, younger but equally skilled, relied on a .338 Lapua Magnum that he used only when conditions required powerful precision. Both men understood that Alaska rewarded careful hunters but punished those who ignored its harsh rules. Their cabin stood near a creek where heavy branches formed a dark canopy overhead. The structure was built years earlier by workers who needed shelter from unpredictable storms. Its walls were thick, and the small windows were framed with strong wood. Inside, the hunters stored meat from the week's journey, along with tools, fuel, and cooking supplies. The floor was crowded with gear from days of long travel, and a faint smell of firewood filled the room. Jonas and Eli moved through the space with quiet steps, preparing for another early morning hunt. Outside, the moon cast thin light through drifting clouds. The air was cold enough to make frost cling to every surface. The forest seemed still, yet both men knew that many animals roamed through the night, guided by scent rather than sight. They kept their rifles close even during rest, fully aware that Alaska was home to some of the continent's largest predators. As midnight approached, the quiet inside the cabin felt thick. Jonas sat near the wall, reviewing their gear, while Eli checked the supplies stored in the corner. The faint sound of the wind brushed against the roof, but nothing else disturbed the silence. Then, without warning, a violent crash struck the side of the cabin. The entire structure shook under the force, making dust fall from the ceiling. Jonas stiffened, and Eli froze in place, the sudden impact sending a cold wave of fear through both men. A massive grizzly bear had been drawn to the scent of stored meat and cooking items. Now it pushed its enormous weight against the walls, testing the cabin's strength. The wood groaned loudly as claws scraped across the surface. Another slam followed, causing the window frames to rattle and loose boards to shift. The hunters moved quickly. Jonas reached for his rifle, gripping it with tense hands, while Eli forced a heavy chair against the front door to slow any further break-in. The bear circled the outside, its steps heavy enough to shake the ground beneath them. It struck a window pane with a single powerful blow, shattering the glass and sending sharp fragments flying across the room. Splintered pieces of wood were scattered across the floor as the wind poured through the broken opening. Dust filled the air as the hunters braced themselves, tense and alert, knowing the night had turned dangerous in an instant. Dust drifted slowly from the ceiling as Jonas and Eli steadied themselves, each breath tight and unsteady. The broken window let in freezing night air, carrying the strong odor of the huge animal still moving outside. Heavy steps circled the damaged wall, pressing into the soft earth with deep weight. The hunters tightened their grips on their rifles, knowing the danger had not passed. The cabin stood between them and the wild, yet the shattered frame showed how thin that barrier had become. The giant grizzly pushed against a crate near the wall, causing it to scrape loudly across the floorboards. Metal tools spilled out, clattering in every direction. Jonas tried to hold ground near the shattered window opening while Eli kept pressure on the blocked door, even though it shook under each hit from outside. A sudden strike to the corner beam made the entire room tilt slightly, the old wood creaking under stress. Every new impact reminded them that even thick logs could not withstand endless force. For long seconds, the animal pawed equipment outside the opening, sending supplies tumbling into the dirt. The hunters stayed low, positioning themselves away from the open gap. They used anything sturdy around them to create barriers, shifting heavy objects to reduce the bear's reach. Through the broken space, only the movement of a large shadow was visible, rising and falling as it searched for food. The smell of stored supplies mingled with the cold night air, tempting the predator to linger. A long moment passed before the heavy steps began to fade. The bear moved away from the wall, circling once more around the cabin. Jonas and Eli waited silently, listening to fading sounds until only wind remained. After several tense minutes, the forest grew still again. The animal had finally left the clearing, swallowed by the dark wilderness. When the danger passed, both hunters sagged with exhaustion. Their arms trembled from the long struggle, and their skins stung from small cuts caused by flying debris. They began clearing shattered wood and glass, pushing broken pieces aside so they could work in a safer space. The cold air pouring through the empty frame reminded them that the structure was no longer secure. They spent the remaining hours preparing supplies, knowing they must leave at first light. By morning, the cabin showed clear signs of the night's fear: crushed boards, scattered gear, and deep prints in the surrounding ground. Jonas and Eli stepped into the crisp dawn, shaken but alive, fully aware that even sturdy shelters could not guarantee protection in remote Alaska.